All right, welcome. Who do we have in the room? S.N.A.P team. Hope your Tuesday is going well. We're getting started here in a second, guys. Just firing up the chat. We're going to do a little fancy whiteboard action here over the face. So we'll see how that works. I'm going to test out something new today in my bag of tricks. When you come into the chat, feel free to let me know if you can see this as an overlay or if you need it to be darker, because I'm going to play around with this new feature that I found and see how it goes. Cool. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate you letting me know. All right. Well, let's dive right in. I don't want to keep anybody waiting, so we'll kind of catch everybody up. But since some of you were on time, we're gonna stick with that. And I know, Kyle, you've got to bounce at your normal 240, and others might as well. So we'll dive right in. I hope your week's going well. Give me a little heads up. How's everything going so far? Feel free to raise your hand and speak, or just punch it in the chat. But honest feedback, what have you enjoyed so far about these? What have you, what's got you maybe confused about the whole process? Or just give me some feedback so I kind of know directionally how we're doing. I'd like to continue to see this group grow and attract new blood from campus as we look to fill the pool of applicants. So just want to get some honest feedback from you. And again, these sessions are about you. I kind of know this stuff and have been living this stuff for almost 2 decades now, and certainly continue to gain new nuances from it. But the key here is that we're being as relevant to you as possible. So I would love some feedback. Tell me what you like, what you dislike. If everything's going well, you can say that too, but just looking to check in. So feel free to fire those into the chat box to me directly if you don't want other people to see them, or in the public, whatever works best for you. But let's dive into today's conversation. We're going to center today, per the curriculum, primarily around, what I call the law of compensation or the law of value, and also, kind of what you should be thinking about now and also ongoingly as you think about your career. Because regardless of whether you plan on starting your own business someday and employing people, or whether you plan on working for someone for your whole career, and that's more your ilk, there really is, this is universal. This will apply in all those situations, both from a what is the likelihood of your own sustainable economic viability, meaning your income, your net worth, your what your efforts are actually worth versus what they could be worth. And it'll also apply if you're running a company at some point, to how you assess people's value in the market. Like what am I supposed to pay, or what am I willing to pay? What's competitive, and also what's sustainable. So, this is a lesson I hope that you'll revisit a bunch. I'm reading your comment right now as they come in here. Let me just take a second. Let alone how important it is. Refreshing. Cool. Well, I appreciate your comments, guys. And like I said, the one thing that I can promise you is that if something's confusing, if I'm not touching on a subject you care most about, again, part of this session is to build a genuine relationship of mutual value exchange. You guys are going to be, if you're selected, you're going to be giving us, work, capacity, effort, intelligence, and all those things. And so this is kind of our investment and my investment in you before that even materializes. So again, what I found is the best way to make this mutually worth both of our times is to just be honest. So I appreciate your honest feedback. When it's positive, obviously I love it. When it's negative, I enjoy that too, because I know you're giving it from a place of it feeling safe enough to do so. So both work. All right, so let's talk about the law of compensation. I'll preface it by starting with this. It's easier to relate things to stuff we already kind of take for granted or understand. So I know for me personally, I don't really understand how gravity works. Like, I probably know enough to convince somebody that I do, but the reality is if you put me with a scientist who understood how gravity works, I probably wouldn't be able to, get most of the answers right. For instance, I know that there's a speed at which all objects fall to the earth because of the force of gravity, but I don't know what that speed actually is. So the point being that most of us, we don't need to know exactly how it works to understand it, to respect it, and to not die every day by violating it. And so much like that, at a base level, I think everybody, regardless, again, of whether they're employing people, whether they're starting a company, investing in companies, or whether they're just going to work for someone as a employee their whole life, everybody should have an equal and fair chance and also an equal and fair understanding of the basics of the law of compensation, much like we have an equal and fair understanding, even if not detailed down to the scientific minutia, of something like the law of gravity. And the reason why I say that is because people in the traditional system, both traditional education system and things like that, are never taught how money actually works and how compensation actually works. We're basically just conditioned to kind of go find an income that allows us to live whatever life we've been conditioned to accept. And then when we're ambitious enough, or whatever the word is, to maybe want more than that, which is kind of our natural human DNA in most cases, then typically we try to apply that same model to that. So in other words, we go, well, I want a little bit more. I want a bigger house, or I want to vacation more, or I'd like more flexibility into where I work. And in our mind, we're trying to figure out, well, what job or what industry is going to pay me $80,000 a year versus $40,000 a year that I might actually be interested in or might be qualified in, because I think at that income level I'd be able to get those things. And there's nothing inherently, it's not about right or wrong. It's just there's nothing inherently flawed in that logic about that I don't need to have, that I could access versus own. Instead of having real conversations about what it is that I actually want, we kind of are projected these wants and desires onto us from an early age through people respect, or for advertising or things like that. We're kind of conditioned to want stuff, and then we're given vehicles by which we can have them, maybe before we even deserve them, through credit, leases, finances, things like that. But we're never really given an understanding of how the whole machine works. In other words, it'd be like kind of not even knowing that gravity is a thing, and going out about your day and not really understanding why humans can't fly, or that we need assistance to fly, or why, everything seems to be stable on the ground, even though the Earth's moving at 26,000 miles an hour or whatever it is. And you may say, well, I don't know if that matters. I think you do understand that it matters, because when we talk about income inequality and all these things that people are going to vote against, or be bitching about, or pissed off about, or just confused by, or wanting to solve, even maybe you want to help solve it and not contribute to more of it. It fundamentally starts with not understanding that there's a law that governs it, and somehow thinking that other things govern it. For instance, nice people or bad people get rich, or whatever the thing is, the money is the root of all evil, or all these things, none of which are even remotely true. It's kind of like saying gravity's evil. Like, it doesn't really even make sense when you say that. The reality is gravity is a scientific phenomenon governed by a universal set of laws that exist on this planet alone, because if you get up in the atmosphere, it no longer applies. And we're all constrained by them. And yet we've also figured out how we can take things as big as an Airbus 380, which weighs, I don't even know, tens of thousands of tons, and we can put it up in the air at 40,000 feet and send it across the planet at 600 miles an hour, right? Somehow that can work. So the idea is that just because a law exists, like gravity, doesn't mean you can't work within it to violate it to your potential advantage or gain. And just like the law of compensation exists, it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It just is, kind of like what we talked about last week. So let's talk about the fundamental kind of things that make it up, because we'll start by this. So if you can see the screen, I just typed in the first part of it. So there's three kind of prongs to the law of compensation. And the first prong is what we'll call just generically the need. Okay, so the need for what you and I do. How big is it? How small is it? How timely is it? All these things kind of make up the input that we would call the need for what we do. So I'll give you another example. If my job was to be the guy who delivered ice to homes back in the 1900s, late 1800s, before we had electricity and before we had refrigerators at scale, the need for what I do was pretty stable, pretty solid, right? Everyone had food that they didn't want to spoil within 24 hours. Most people had a box that would, at least for 24 hours, hold a block of ice and allow it to melt very slowly and keep that said food cold. And they didn't have a machine or a way or a barn big enough to make big blocks of ice that they could, use for themselves. And so freeze big blocks of water, for instance. So the Iceman there was a need, right? Someone had to come to your door. They had to knock on that door. They had to get your contract, and then they had to deliver ice to you every day at a certain time so that you could store your food. And that need at the time was big and scaled. So there was plenty of people probably employed as, Iceman delivery people. And they got paid maybe a better wage than other people did, because maybe there was certain skills, or maybe there was a scarcity to that job, meaning maybe it was a quote unquote good job that a lot of people wanted. And so you had to kind of be personable, and you had to be reliable, and you had to be whatever the things were, right? Which leads us to the second piece of the law for compensation, which is the ability. So the first two pieces may not come as any shock to you, because they may totally just make logical sense, right? Like, how big is the need, or how timely is the need for what I do? And then B, how good am I, or whomever is getting paid that much, at filling that need? Meaning, what is my ability compared to the rest of the market at filling that need? Ability can be defined several ways. How good am I talking about myself doing it? Meaning, how aware are people that I can do it? Because that's always a key thing, right? So introverts, extroverts, sometimes that plays into it, because sometimes people are really talking about themselves in a way where it's obvious that they fill that need. And so people, get used to that. Can't see what I'm typing. Okay, see the gray screen. All right, let me see now. Can you see it now? I might need to click out of it. Let me know. Let me know if that showed up for you. It might have showed up now. Thanks for letting me know. So again, the law of compensation, and I'll wait to see your responses to make sure that you can kind of see what's being typed on the screen. Oh, not yet. All right. Well, my little tool isn't working as well as I'd like. Okay. So let me try something else. Let me go white and see if you can see that. Got it now. All right. So maybe I was being too transparent. All right. So thanks for letting me know. Learning how to use this new feature, and so taking me a minute. I was trying to see if I could do it where I was still on the screen, because I thought that would be pretty rad. But nonetheless, whiteboard is good enough. So the need for what we do, our ability to do it, and then the third piece of this is what's called the replaceability. And another way to think about this is, how easy or difficult it is to replace me. So these are the three things that make up the law of compensation that govern basically the difference between people that are billionaires and people that are barely getting by, and everything in between, right? So uh, the thing that trips people up a lot of times is the market will move. Sometimes it moves slowly. Sometimes it feels like it moves faster. Sometimes it feels like it's not yet caught up. And what I mean by that is sometimes we hear about, oh, well, this industry is going to be where all the jobs are, right? Whether it's nursing or whatever. And then we get into it and maybe it's not as lucrative as we thought it might be, or as fast, because maybe there's a lag between the market need and whatever and the volume. But then all of a sudden it becomes a job where there's not enough people, right? It's scarce and there's not enough talent, and everyone's talking about the talent wars, in which case when there's scarcity, then the talent wars usually mean that, someone who has the ability to do it and the willingness to do it, they're hard to replace because there's not enough of them. So replaceability can be the factor of there's not enough talent. It could be meaning for the positive, right? Like what makes income go up. You're hard to find. Maybe it's a skill set that is not easy to learn, takes years to learn, whether it's, technology or doctors or whatever it may be. Like maybe it's something that is very nuanced and crosses a couple different disciplines and is just a unique thing that's very hard. Maybe it's a talent. Maybe it's, people that can fill box offices and sell movies, no matter what they're in, at a clip that is just reliable and allows people to make large financial investments to the tunes of 50, 60, 100 million, $200-300 million on the production of it. And so, the track record we have in a space, as well as the real-time relevance that we have in a space, makes up our as well as the market conditions make up the replaceability. So back to the icebox, I don't care how good you are at delivering ice, right? There was a point in time where the most reliable, the most trustworthy, the most on top of it ice delivery guy was out of a job because they were replaced by a machine that didn't require ice to be delivered anymore. So sometimes our replaceability doesn't come from our own industry. Sometimes it comes from something completely counter to that industry that solves that need in a new way. We saw that happen with, email. We saw that happen with e-commerce. We've seen that happen with a lot of things, right? Like the need for what we do when we live in a purely retail, brick and mortar, shop local kind of world is a totally different need than when we live in a world where essentially we can buy anything at any hour of the day and have it shipped to us within 24 hours from anywhere in the world, right? So as the need shifts, then our abilities, if not reapplied to that new need or not relevant to that new need, we have to look for work elsewhere. It means we could be disrupted. So the thing to always be kind of thinking about just very pragmatically is, as you're going through your college education right now, whatever your major is, whatever is, like, what is the need in the market that I'm being schooled in? So whether it's agriculture, whether it's the College of Business, whether it's engineering and applied sciences, like what is the need that I'm filling or that I'm going to be skilled up enough to have a potential to fill? Like what is that actual need? Generic, not just my need of I need a job, but the market need. And then what are the variety of positions that I might be more advantaged because of my degree or because of my experience or because of my internship or because of that I might be able to sell somebody on my ability versus the next guy or girl, right? And then how hard or difficult will it be for that need in the market to be replaced by something other than a human, other than me, other than my company that I want to work for, whatever, right? You have to look at all of it. So again, another easy generic example that even maybe non-sports fans kind of can understand is if we look at why NFL, baseball, NASCAR, like there's a handful of live sports that have become exponentially more valuable over the last 20 something years, 30 years. For instance, Love me or hate me, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. I was born that way. We haven't won anything in 23 years, right? We barely can make the playoffs. We're bipolar. We're just a mess. But I root for the Cowboys. So if you look at a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who currently today is valued at somewhere around $4.7 to $5 billion with a B, and in 1989 when they were bought, they got bought by Jerry Jones, the current owner, for right around $149 million. So bought for $149 million. I don't remember what they made last year. I think they made somewhere around net profit of $400 million. Today, they are worth $5 billion. So 30 short years later, an investment of $149 is now worth $5 billion. That's a pretty darn good ROI. I don't care what industry, what business you're in. And you think, okay, how could that be? Players that, in baseball and other teams, the Dodgers, for instance, in baseball a couple years ago were bankrupt, and the Dodgers got bought out of bankruptcy, meaning the business was failing, it was insolvent. They had to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy to reorganize all the debt, all the creditors, and the business was bought for $2 billion. So you and I would all day be happy with an investment as long as we weren't, valued our investment at $4 billion. We'd be all happy to have something that was basically dead that we could sell for $2 billion. Like, that wouldn't be a bad day. How does this happen, right? Like, this is what confuses people. Like, how in the world does this happen? The most recent example would be, I saw today in CNBC that, Adam Newman, who was the CEO and founder up until last week, or chairman even of the board, maybe up until today or last week, of WeWork, just got offered an exit package. So basically, WeWork went from a $47 billion valuation less than a year ago, 6 months ago, to somewhere between a $7 billion to $8 billion valuation today. They had to cancel their IPO. You've probably been following the story, but maybe not. They're a co-working, office space, franchise, and they, they basically just got decimated, right? Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. So everyone that bought into the round anywhere north of $8 billion has basically lost all their money, including SoftBank, who's the lead investor in their most recent round and also leading this turnaround. SoftBank just offered a package to the founder. So here's the guy who basically was at the helm, took it up, and then took it down. They just offered him a package to leave, meaning you're fired, worth $1.7 billion. Meanwhile, a couple of weeks ago, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 8,000 people that worked at WeWork that thought they were all going to be low-level millionaires because they all had equity stock and they were ready to go public and they thought they were going to, cash in their options, are now out of a job, meaning whatever severance they got was certainly not $1.7 billion, may have been a couple months' salary or a little bit better, but essentially now they're looking for work. They don't have a job anymore. So they went from thinking they were going to be millionaires and working for one of the coolest companies out there to unemployed in a matter of weeks. And this is the kind of stuff that confuses people, right? Just go, how does this happen? But if you run it through this formula, you can kind of understand a lot better, right? So it's kind of like if you watch 10,000 people walk off of a building and all hit the ground, you'd go, well, why the hell did you do that? Like, didn't you know it was a building? And you watch one guy walk to the edge of the building and make a right turn and stay on the roof and walk towards the exit door. And on his way out, grab a bag of cash because he knew the building was going to burn down. Then you wouldn't be surprised, right? You go, well, there's a guy who understands that gravity's not a way off this building that's going to leave him alive. And that most people are going to either willingly or unwillingly be forced or choose gravity just because they don't understand the game or the environment they're in. Here's a guy who understands the game and the environment he's in, maybe even threw up some warning signs about it, wasn't listened to or was ignored, and decided, well, before this thing burns down, I'm going to not only preserve myself, but I'm going to sell all my office equipment and everything else at a discount to a guy and walk out of here with something. And none of us expect Adam Newman to have any friends, or he's probably going to have to change his whole look, cut his hair off, do whatever, because he's going to be the most hated guy. And in business for the next, several years, if not decades. The bottom line is here's someone who understood, consciously or unconsciously, they understood the law of compensation, the need for what we do, the ability to do it, and how hard or difficult it is to replace us. Let's go to the NFL, and then we'll come back to Adam Newman. The NFL, the need for what I do. It's entertainment. It's nothing more, right? You and I are going to spend X amount of hours every week killing time, doing stuff to veg out, right? We can choose to watch Netflix. We can choose to watch whatever we're going to do. We can read books. We can do whatever. Sports is a part of American culture. It's part of global culture, depending on the sport, right? Sports is something that makes us part of our social circle. It gives us a social circle in some cases. So there's this need of connection and of adrenaline, of all these different things that kind of get packaged up and delivered through live sports. And at the professional level, there are a group of people that can play that sport at a level that most of the world, meaning 99.9% of the world, will never even dream of being able to do. So we marvel at their abilities to play the same game that we all played as a kid, even if it was just in the backyard, but didn't do as well. We marvel at their strength. We marvel at their speed. We marvel at their toughness. We marvel at whatever it is that we marvel at, right? And we do that in community. And so since we do that in community, and we do that in, these kind of tribes, it plays on this human nature in this tribe. But that's not why it's worth billions of dollars today versus hundreds of millions 30 years ago. Think about for a minute why sports versus any other form of content over the last decade plus, 15 plus, has gone exponentially richer. To save time, because I know we're running into our last 10 minutes, the reason why is because the business model for sports is if I can attract a set of eyeballs, right, I can get your attention, and I can keep that attention at scale for any length of time today. There are people, there are corporations, there are brands, there are products that over here want you as a demographic. You are their customer too, right? So maybe they sell whatever they sell, cars, they sell whatever. They want you to pay attention to them. So this is advertising, right? Media and entertainment forever, the business model has been, let me go attract with good content, with something that is addictive, with something that builds culture, with something that builds and galvanizes communities and tribes of people of a common nature. Let me build that. And then how I will monetize it is I will give that away for free, meaning other than their cable bill or whatever, which most people don't consider something they pay for. I will give them that entertainment for free because I have advertisers and companies who would like the chance to speak to those people. So that's the advertising model, right? Nothing fancy or significant about that. But if you think about over the last 30 years since the internet kind of stood up, so right around that same time as Jerry Jones buys the Cowboys, the internet essentially becomes a public utility. Early 90s, people are still figuring out it's one directional. You can type into it, but you can't really communicate back with it. It just serves you up a bunch of stuff. Get into the 2000s, 10 years after that, you now have a 2.0 revolution where now it's conversational, right? So as these things prevail, what happens is most media and entertainment gets fragmented because people's attention spans are now diverted. They have, instead of 3 networks, they have hundreds, if not thousands of opportunities, both online and offline. And so you've grown up in a world, most of you've grown up in a world where you've known nothing but that. But 30 years ago, there was 3 networks, and cable was a new thing. 24/7 news on CNN and stuff wasn't a thing until the early 90s, late 90s. So now there's all these other drains on that same 3 to 6 to 7 hours a weekend that I'm going to give the TV, for instance. But most of that stuff now could also be ordered on demand over that same time. I could TiVo it, I could DVR it or whatever. I could record it, essentially. I could watch it later. And less and less did I need to see it in real time to stay relevant. Meaning there used to be a time in the early 80s, mid 80s, late 90s even, where certain shows on Thursday night, you had to wait. It was called Managed Dissatisfaction. You had to wait until Thursday at 9 o'clock to know what happened. And everyone that you knew in your social circle at work or at school or whatever had to wait too. There was nobody that could see it early. And so Friday morning, first thing, everybody was talking about, hey, did you see Friends? Or did you see what happened on this show? Well, as the internet progressed and as things happened, the need for entertaining ourselves didn't drop, but the ability for one piece of content versus another to do it started to shift, because now things that weren't really critical, that didn't really have a real-time aspect to it, became optional, meaning like I could watch Friends on the weekend. I wouldn't really lose any social credibility if I did that. The one thing that didn't was live sports, because especially as Twitter and Facebook in the early mid 00s started to take off, even if I wanted to, quote unquote, tape the game, let's say I was out of town and I wanted to, watch the Cowboys after I got home, but I couldn't watch it at 1 or whatever, and I DVR'd it or I taped it. That didn't last, because what would happen is if I had as we got to 05, 06, 07, and I got a mobile phone, even if I didn't want to be told, some alert, some Facebook feed, some Twitter feed, somebody in my social circle that was now connected to me and alerting me in real time would ruin it for me, right? I'd get a score update and I'd know that it was 7-0 in the first quarter. And I'm like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. So even when you tried to opt out, what happened was real sports kind of scale, fantasy, all these things took off. And so what didn't happen for other forms of content was any loyalty. Actually, loyalty declined, right? It became very hard to get a sitcom to work. It became very, very hard to get a drama to work, because no one really cared about watching it in real time. As Netflix took off and began streaming, binging became a thing, which meant the whole point was not to watch it every week. It was to watch it all at once whenever I felt like it. And so as those things killed the advertising model, the inventory didn't go away, meaning the demand for brands needing to talk to advertisers didn't go away. But the amount of content that was worth advertising against at a premium price dropped dramatically. And so the only piece of content that people would sit through commercials for was live sports, because they had no choice. And so the law of compensation said the need for what I do is entertain. My ability to do it, okay, good shows are just as good as good sporting events. The difference is good shows are replaceable because there's no loss to the social demographic. There's no loss to the social credibility if I'm out of the loop on a show. But if I'm a Cowboys fan and I call myself one and I'm not watching it in real time, I either missed that game, which means I missed all those conversations and all that screaming and yelling and all that chatting back and forth, or I watched it. And if I watched it, I basically even if I was tuning out or looking at another device, I sat through the commercials. And so since that was the only traditional advertising model that still commanded a premium, that premium went up. As that premium went up, so did the values of the teams. As that value of the team went up, then the people that were worth playing and played quarterback and things like that, their salaries in commensurate order went up. And so all of a sudden now you have guys signing $50 million guaranteed contracts simply because the team's worth $5 billion. When $50 million was what a third of the whole team was worth 30 years ago, not just a running back. Will that change? Absolutely, it's going to change, right? Less and less kids are playing football than ever. 30% of high school kids don't play football that used to just a decade ago. So the supply of new talent to even continue to play a game 10 years out from now is going to diminish, along with all these other macro forces that might happen, like people decide to do esports or video games instead because it's just as live, just as interactive, but a different culture, a different group, a different generation that cares about different things, expects different things. So everything is vulnerable to this. And at some point, the NFL won't be one of the most valuable businesses to own, very shortly, probably within the next 5 or 10 years. Same thing with WeWork as we wrap up. So essentially, with WeWork, if you want to unpack that, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but generically, just apply it to this model. What's the need? Well, the need is I start a technology company. It's called WeWork. It's a real estate play and a technology company to provide affordable rental space for startups and technology companies that don't want to lock in long-term leases. So I fill a need on the user end that says, hey, I'll pay a little bit more per month or per square foot to rent a smaller space or even rent a desk from you, because I want the flexibility to be able to leave in 3 months if my business doesn't work out without having a big liability. So they solved the need on the front end of the user, meaning the early stage company or the technology company that wanted to be able to scale and be more flexible with their real estate. They solve a need on the real estate owner because they say, listen, you're a building owner, you're a landlord. You used to just do 10-year leases and scale them up and companies wouldn't go away and you had all these blue chip clients. That's not the world today. People want to live and work in different environments. They want a cooler environment. They want open floor plans. They want all this stuff. You don't want to put the large capital investment into your building, and we don't have the ability to buy that building, but it's in the perfect location on Fifth Avenue or wherever the heck it was. So here's what we'll do. We'll do a master lease with you. We will come in. We'll tenant improve the building, meaning we'll spend the money to fix it and make it cool and hip and whatever. we will sublease to all these people. That's where we'll make our money. And you'll have the guarantee of knowing we're going to be here for the next 10 years. So we're your only tenant. So you get to keep your business model the way it is. We get to build an arbitrage play on top of that where we essentially sell it off in parts and we keep that spread and we become cool. Okay, nothing wrong with that idea, right? Not worth 60 billion, but there's nothing wrong with that business at the start. So here's the kid who comes up with it. His name's Adam Newman. He's the CEO. He gets a bunch of people. They start to do it. It starts to work. It becomes a thing. They build the culture. You got this guy who's like a yoga slash, total hipster model. Like he's the perfect thing, right? So he fills the need of the charismatic CEO, the charismatic leader, the visionary. He's the culture builder. We as a community, right? He's selling the dream. He can talk to investors. He can talk to VC. He can talk to that. So VC money comes in, institutional money comes in. What's their need? Well, institutional money need is I need to put 100 bets on the table, knowing that out of those 100 bets, 2 of those companies are going to return my entire fund. 15 of them are going to basically break even, and the rest are going to fail. And I know that. I'm a VC. That's what I do, and I get to stay in business. Okay. So I need to bet on big billion-dollar ideas because I'm a billion-dollar fund, which means I need 2 companies that are going to return me at least $1 billion in order for me to stay in business 10 years from now. Great. Here's an idea that could scale, could go global. It's big enough. It's charismatic enough. I'm going to put money in your A round, C round. So then what happens is the need is, well, I bought in at a $5 million post-money valuation. So the next round needs to be 10 or 15 million. Well, as it starts to work, then you get momentum because now it's one of those things that's not going to disappear. It's a real thing. It's taking off. It's got traction. And so then the B and C round investors, the SoftBanks of the world go, well, wait, I've got billions of dollars I've got to invest. I got to get the same 2 to 3x ROI. There's not that many companies that are worth that. So I need to go park, as crazy as it's going to sound, I need to go park a couple $100 million somewhere and know that it's going to come back to me. And so the need keeps stacking, right? The mechanics of the financial game keep stacking. So, okay, well, we'll put $100 million in at a $60 billion or a $15 billion or a $20 billion valuation. So everybody keeps levering up the financial game to make their ends meet. Meanwhile, the business is losing $2 million a quarter on $4 million or $2 billion a quarter on $4 billion in revenue. But it doesn't matter because it's growing. And as long as it keeps growing, we can keep selling the story until we get to IPO, and then we'll dump it on the retail market, and the retail investors will buy it all up because they recognize it as a brand, and then we'll be out. And if it sets back a little bit, whatever. So that's the game, right? The need is I need to pass the bag to the next guy. Now, hopefully it lasts, but if it doesn't last, as long as I'm out, I'm okay. Well, when it goes bad, like it just did, and the market catches up with you or the market shifts and realizes you're not worth 47 billion, then you get the opposite. Now the need is I need to get back something. And so 47 billion becomes 20 billion. And then the 20 billion guys, oh, well, shit, I'll take 5 billion. And so what happens is you start this exit. Meanwhile, the founder still owns his X $100 million worth of founder stock, which is worth something. And he understands the game. The need is this company needs to be turned around now. I'm done because even if I was credible, even if I knew what to do next, all my credibility has been spent on this ride of roller coaster. The bottom line is I still hold an asset. I hold X amount of million shares. I own X amount of IP. I own all the, whatever he positioned himself to own, whereas everyone else just held a job. And so whether we like it or not, the need and the replaceability is I got to replace Adam Newman. I'm SoftBank. If I want to lose all 50 billion of my money, then I just write it off. But if I don't, and I think I can save this business and over the next 5 to 10 years, maybe turn it into a break even or get out at some gain, I've got to now buy this thing for 7 billion. I've got to put more money after my bad money. And if I'm going to do that, 7 billion minus however many shares he has, minus whatever other value he has, minus his need to tell me where all the dead bodies are buried, because maybe he's the only guy to know. Collectively, I add that all up, and it's worth $1.7 billion. In order to replace him, it's going to cost me $1.7 billion. So spend some time thinking about this. Every time you have a question about why somebody makes money, why someone doesn't make money, just run it through. What's the need? What's the ability to fill it? How replaceable by themselves, by someone else, or by an industry, all together different, are they? And then what's the timing? If not today, when will they be replaced? It'll help you. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm going to keep it so that Kyle can head the class. And we'll see you guys next week. But that is today's lesson.